Hey everybody and welcome to Vlogmas. It is episode 21 and in this episode we are going to review everything that came out for Star Wars in 2023. There's only really a few things that came out from Star Wars / Disney / Lucasfilm in 2023, but we're going to focus on what I consider the two main things. So we had The Mandalorian Season 3 and we had the first season of Ahsoka. And let's begin with what came out first, which was The Mandalorian Season 3. And I thought personally that it was a really good season. It had something more of a linear storyline, I felt. Not that it didn't have lots of side missions and quests along the way for Mando, but it was a little bit more linear than what we'd had in Season 2, where every single episode felt like it was a different kind of sub-story, a side mission. It was like playing Grand Theft Auto at times. And also Season 2 kind of felt to me like it was an opportunity for them to start bringing in other characters who were then going off and having their own spin-off series and their own shows after that, including Ahsoka, but also Boba Fett. So I kind of felt like it was a show that was just designed to kind of bring in or give them the opportunity to then push other shows off the back of it, rather than focusing purely on The Mandalorian and Grogu and kind of what they were doing, which isn't to say they didn't do that as well. It was just the way they structured Season 2. Season 3, I felt, was a little bit more like Season 1. It was a little bit more linear and therefore a little truer to the story, which isn't to say that he didn't go on side missions. He certainly did, and some of them were quite questionable. The episode, for example, that had Jack Black in it was a little bit odd, I thought, but in any event, I felt the series as a whole was actually really good, and it's difficult not to enjoy it when it's The Mandalorian. I've found that particular series has always been very, very watchable throughout 3 seasons, and it doesn't really, I think, get hurt when other characters come into it. I just felt like it was a little bit forced in Season 2, whereas in Season 3 it just felt a little bit more natural. You had some new characters that came in and some familiar faces like Bo-Katan, and it was really a little bit more true to the story of Mandalore, the Mandalorians generally, as well as, of course, Mando himself. And on that note, the way that the series actually finishes with the Mandalorians returning to Mandalore to kind of re-establish their home and get set back up again as being this very kind of mighty empire, I felt that was actually quite a nice way to kind of finish the story and end that season, and it kind of puts them in a good position for the reasons why we don't then really see any of them when we get into the sequel trilogy. It's because they now are on their own home world and can kind of isolate themselves away from everything else that's going on, which isn't to say they're not affected by the First Order, we just haven't seen it yet. And on the subject of the First Order, I felt that it was really interesting that Moff Gideon's kind of guards that he has at the end of the series, not the red ones, but the kind of white and grey coloured troopers who are sort of armed up in Beskar, they looked very suspiciously like First Order stormtroopers, or certainly you could see that they were revolving in that direction. So it was quite interesting to see that, because you're starting to then get more kind of hints and nods towards the First Order and what's kind of happening next. We've obviously already had little hints and suggestions when it comes to things like cloning and trying to resurrect Palpatine, as we then saw in the sequel trilogy. So I find it quite funny in some ways that a lot of fans will say that they really like Mandalorian, but they hate the sequel stuff, and they hate Disney and everything they bring out, but at the same time love Mandalorian. So you're kind of contradicting yourself, because The Mandalorian is part of that and is leading into the sequel trilogy. We can see that with the clones, the massive suggestions about the fact that they're trying to resurrect Palpatine, and the projects that they're clearly working on that lead to the First Order and Palpatine's return. We see it so much that it's inevitable, and it's difficult to really ignore it. Now, when we get to the end of Season 3, we do see that it's Moff Gideon who's trying to clone himself off the back of what the professors and scientists are trying to do for Palpatine. So he's sort of copying that cloning technology, and it's interesting because we obviously see him end unalived at the end of the season. He kind of gets blown up and set on fire. But what we don't really know is whether it's actually him or it could be one of his clones. So who's to say that Moff Gideon won't come back? It was a brilliant way for his character to finish, but there may not actually be an end for his character, because they can just bring him back over and over and over again and say that every time he goes and ends, it's actually a clone and not the real one. So I don't know. There was an interesting little kind of suggestion of it, because if you look back through all 3 series, Moff Gideon always has a mustache throughout every episode that he's in, up until the very end, when all of a sudden he doesn't have one. And if you look at his clones in all of the tanks, none of them have got any. So it's just an interesting kind of suggestion or a hint that it certainly gives them the option to bring back that character if they wanted to, and say that the one we saw at the end of season 3, the one that dies, is actually not the real one. There were some really good parts to this series as well. I don't think I'll ever be able to forget Grogu using IG-11 as an armor, a robot droid to kind of walk around and control, and just only being able to say the words yes and no. I just thought that was actually, it was funny and it was really well done, and he was brilliant at the end as well. Grogu kind of coming into his powers and really using his force abilities in a protective way, in a proper Jedi way. He never uses them to attack, he only ever uses them to defend and protect. So he's clearly been trained by Luke. You can see that in the way that he's using those abilities now, and I really liked the way that the series finished with him and Mando kind of off on their own little homestead, and the suggestion that they can now go off, just the two of them, and have their own kind of adventures out in the Outer Rim, and kind of get up to whatever it is they want to do with proper bounty hunting, which is always kind of what Mando was supposed to be about. And he can kind of now do that as a bit of a father-son duo with Grogu, which would be really fun to see. So I don't know if there's going to be a season 4, but certainly there's reason to think that there could be. They could go and tell those adventures, and certainly everybody, I think, really enjoys Mandalorian, so why would you not want to do another season of him? Having said that, we do know that they are planning to do a movie set in that period of time, which I think will probably feature Mandalorian quite heavily. Certainly bring him in either as a side character or the main focus, we don't know yet. But you've also got Ahsoka in that time period as well, and it may well be that they start trying to almost tie in all of these series that they've done so far with Boba Fett as well, and kind of get them all involved in that era and make a new movie out of it. It'll be interesting to see how they do it and who they include in it, but whether they just do that for Mando or they do a season 4 for him. Personally, I'd rather they go down the movie road. That, to me, I think would be more interesting and more fun to see. So that's what I hope that they do. But as far as season 3 was concerned, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I'm always loving Mando content. I think it's great fun. I love the character. I love all of the side missions that he goes on. They're usually great fun. And I love the way that the story line is kind of developing slowly into the sequel trilogy and making it a nice transition from the originals into the sequels. I think it works. I know a lot of people won't like that, but I do, and this is my video, so there we go. And then, as I've already mentioned, it was Ahsoka that came out later on in the year, and this was a series that I actually felt very caught off guard by. We knew it was coming, but I didn't expect it to be that good. I was kind of hesitant to think that it was going to be anything particularly great. Ahsoka's obviously such a beloved character, and I wasn't ever really sure what story they were going to tell with her. But actually what they ended up making, I thought, was fantastic. It was so good and so emotionally driven as well throughout the entire thing. I believe it was episode 6 in that series where the entire episode is just flashbacks basically of her and Anakin back in the Clone Wars, and seeing live action Clone Wars with Anakin and Ahsoka was unbelievable. I mean, fans have been crying out for that for such a long time. It is fan service, of course it is, but it's so well done and so emotionally impactful. After that episode had finished, I think I was looking on like TikTok or whatever, and people's reactions to that episode was pure emotion. I mean, people were just genuinely bawling their eyes out in reaction to this one episode that was so well done, and it's so good to see Hayden Christensen coming back again and again, kind of returning to that role of Anakin and Darth Vader as well. Because he does it obviously so well. It's so great to see him accepted and embracing that role that he's had for all of these years. And it was just really, really well done. It was so, so good. The music, the scenes, the way that he transitions from Anakin to Vader in a few of those scenes as well, just even very briefly and very, very quickly, was perfectly executed. He's still an absolute class when it comes to his saber technique as well. He hasn't lost a step. He looks so good with a saber in his hand. And I'm desperately screaming for more live action Clone Wars because of that. I think everybody would love to see that, even if it was just a one-off thing with him and teaming up again with Ewan McGregor, and yeah, to see Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka in live action during the Clone Wars with Captain Rex and all of the clone troopers. I mean, that is an absolute dream, I think, for so many prequel fans and fans of the Clone Wars, and obviously even of Rebels as well, which sort of ties into the Ahsoka storyline further on down the line. So it's something that really delivered, I felt, to fans, even though you could say, well, it's just that one episode, but actually the whole series was really good. And obviously when you get to the end, you get that little extra sequence at the end with Anakin's Force Ghost as well, which is really well done. And actually at the end of that episode, we know now, or we think we know, that Ahsoka and Sabine seem to be stuck on some world somewhere in some galaxy where they can't now get back home. They've basically swapped places with Ezra. So I imagine that they're probably going to want to do a season 2, which might aim to kind of bring them back. Although to some degree, I kind of feel like they shouldn't do it, because obviously in the sequels, Ahsoka isn't there, and Ahsoka has actually died by that point, because we hear her Force Ghost talking to Rey at the very end. So maybe rather than go through the heartbreak of watching that character terminated, it would be better to kind of just say, well, all right, well, she's lost on this other world and that's where she stays and she's never coming back, and that's why she wasn't involved in the sequels or anything like that. So that would be the easy way to do it. But I do think that they will actually do a second series and try to bring her back, and then that will tie, I imagine, into what then turns into the film, as I mentioned earlier. Ezra as well was a really good addition. I felt that he was actually very well portrayed, and a lot of the other characters that were in this as well. I can't not mention Ray Stevenson's performance. He was so good. For a character that's a little bit of a side character and that nobody had ever heard before, he was so impactful and mysterious but intriguing, and he was just so brilliantly put together, and I felt like I always wanted to know what he was up to and what he was thinking, because you know throughout the whole thing he's planning on something. You never really know what it is, and it's such a shame that obviously Ray Stevenson passed away and we're not going to get to see him be that character again and tell that story a little bit further. I assume that they're going to maybe look to recast it. I'm always of two minds when it comes to recasting, whether or not it's better to leave the emotional impact of having lost the actor. But there's a story to tell there, which everybody suspects is going to be about the father, son and daughter, or whatever it is, the trinity, as it were, that create the Force and all those kinds of things that we saw in the Clone Wars. Now, I would like to see that in live action. I think that would be really, really good. But it's obviously just such a shame that Ray Stevenson isn't going to be a part of that. So it's a terrible shame. It's a huge loss. It's very sad. But let's not take away from the fact his performance was superb. It was really, really good. His first scenes as that character were very reminiscent of the first time we see Darth Vader. He's fighting his way through a hallway of guards with his lightsaber. He's lifting them up and throwing them around and force choking them and everything else. You know, super, super powerful. You get this real villainous tone, and it's then expanded. He becomes not just the villain and a protagonist, but he also becomes somebody who's got a story to tell, and there's a backstory, and there's a mystery, and there's a real determination. And what makes a good villain is when you can kind of see where the villain is coming from. They're trying to do something that they believe is genuinely the good thing. They don't think they're the bad guy, and that really came across with that character. So brilliantly well done. It was very, very engaging. And on the subject of characters, Thrawn coming back and in live action, I thought that was fantastic. I'm so glad that they brought back the voice actor into live action, because that voice carries that character so superbly well. It was chilling to kind of hear him returning, and seeing him in live action was really good. A lot of people have said they didn't like necessarily the appearance of him, but to those people I say, get over it, because it was brilliant. And his kind of zombie death trooper guards were fantastic. I've seen some amazing cosplays of those at various comic conventions since then, and they looked really, really good. I actually have heard a lot of people say that that's how they thought stormtroopers should have looked in the sequel trilogy. They shouldn't have created a brand new sort of look for them. They should have taken the old look and sort of strapped them up and bandaged them up and made them look like they were beaten and kind of, you know, falling apart, which they were. But you've got to remember that's partly because they were zombies, basically. And there is even a good shot of one of them whose helmet had been kind of partially destroyed, and you can see underneath it's like a full-on zombie. It's definitely not a normal person, but that was just so cool. It was brilliant, and it just added to the show and just made it really such a spectacle. And in addition to that, we also had the Night Sisters as well, so it was great to kind of see that being brought into live action as well. We know a lot about that, really more I would say from the games, but and also from the Clone Wars, and I'd love to see some more of that. That is Star Wars lore that we've never really seen in live action before, so I definitely want more of that. So overall, I felt like Ahsoka was brilliant. It had that emotional impact, it had such engaging and really good characters in it, the action sequences were brilliant, and it was overall just fantastic. I always wanted more. I was constantly looking forward to the next episode of that show, and I'm genuinely upset that there aren't any more to watch. So whether they do it as another season or they wait and do it as a movie, I don't mind. I just want them to carry on that storyline, because I thought that it was absolutely fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. And there we go. Sadly, it was just those two shows, but in actual fact, I think that's a good thing. I think that it's better to have quality over quantity. Always have to make sure I say that really carefully. But we've seen, I think, in previous years, particularly where Marvel are just churning out show after show after show, and it diminishes the quality so badly because it ends up looking really cheap. It's very quickly produced, it's badly written, whereas, you know, you don't even have to have 2 shows a year, you could just have 1, and the impact of it then is more great because you're having to wait for it. There's more anticipation for it. They're not just churning it out, and they can put more time and more care into telling good stories with amazing characters and just creating brilliant, brilliant shows, which I felt as though Star Wars did really, really well in 2023. I felt like it was a great year for them. And they also made some decent announcements as well at Star Wars Celebration. So we know that there are 3 new movies in the works. One which was set way, way in the past, something like 10,000 years before the High Republic, and looking at the origins of the Jedi, the Force, and how it all started. That's an amazing story to tell, because I don't think that anything has ever gone back that far. I mean, we've had stuff go back to like the Old Republic and stuff like that, but that predates even that. So it's a brand new story, and certainly something that will be, yeah, we've never seen anything like that. So it'll be really interesting to kind of see how they do it. I imagine it'll have its haters, I'm sure it will. But ultimately, it's a great story idea and intriguing to kind of see how they do it. The second film that they've announced, as I mentioned before, is kind of set in this New Republic era, and it's going to basically be a Mandoverse movie, I suspect, and bring in all of the characters from The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka, and try and tie them up. There'll be a lot of Rebels characters, I imagine, in that as well, and I'm not really sure what storyline they're going to tell with that, but maybe it will lead into perhaps the First Order actually coming to fruition. Maybe we'll see Snoke finally. Who knows? That one's a bit of a question mark as to what they actually do. It could be anything. I could bring back any kind of villain for that as sort of driving them all together to kind of come together to fight this big evil. But we do know the First Order is starting to show its signs throughout the series that we've had with Mando. So there's hints that it's there, and it may be that that's the driving force in this film. I don't know, but I definitely want to see it because I'm pretty sure that Mandalorian will be in it, and therefore it will be really cool. And the third film that they announced is going to be kind of an extension to the sequel trilogy. I don't think it's going to be an episode 10. That is not how they're sort of positioning this. This is going to be its own thing. It's not an episode 10. It is a carry-on after what happened in episode 9, but set quite far after it, and we'll see basically Rey becoming, I suppose, Master Rey, Mistress Rey, however that works, and presumably establishing a new Jedi Order. So it's new stories to tell, and a lot of people are saying that they don't want this, but to those people I would say there are plenty of people that do want it, and there are sequel trilogy fans, and there are Disney fans, and there are other people that you have to think about. It's not just about what people who prefer the prequels and the originals want anymore. What Disney have done is they've expanded Star Wars to being such a huge thing, and they're trying to make it appeal to everyone, which is never really going to work. And yes, there are plenty of things that have their faults, and people like Star Wars Theory who make claims that it's really bad because it's got bricks and screws in the background, all the while knowing that you can see exactly the same things in the original trilogies and you never had a problem with those. So I think some people just hate it because it's cool to hate it. They just want to seem like they're somehow superior for that reason. But no matter what your opinion on it is, it's coming, and it's a thing, and it has fans, and it has a fandom, and it does have people that are demanding it and wanting it, myself included. So I welcome that. I genuinely hope that there will be more sequel content. I'd love to see more stories of Rey and Finn and everybody else that we've had, because that to me is Star Wars. The whole thing is Star Wars. It doesn't matter whether you like all of it or part of it, but appreciate and understand that there are fans that like other bits that you don't, and therefore celebrate that. Be inclusive, let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. And on that somewhat positive bombshell, it is time to end. So we are getting to the end of Vlogmas. It is now the 21st, episode 21. In theory, we should be able to get to episode 24, but I highly suspect that tomorrow on the 22nd, I will probably fail my Vlogmas challenge because I've got work during the day, and then it is my work Christmas party. God only knows what time I'm going to get back home to be able to do a video, and even if I do get back in a reasonable hour, the chances of me being in physical enough condition, you know, physically fit and capable and coherent probably won't be. But we shall see. So there's every possibility that I will not do a video tomorrow, in which case we'll pick it back up at the weekend. So on that terrible disappointment, it is definitely time to end. Please do subscribe. I'll see you real soon. Have a good evening.